hot. Good afternoon. I feel like standing today. Good to see you. Hey, back at you. Welcome to the Festival Noon series and a Living Ideas Art and Community Dialogue conversation. I'll explain what that is. My name is Rob Goodwin. I work in the education department, and we're going to go over a few logistics before we begin. First, believe it or not, we are live streaming this event. So yeah, you are now across the webosphere, hopefully in the Rogue Valley and beyond. So we will be using microphones. When we come to get your questions, we'll be coming to you, or I'll be coming to you. Please speak directly into the microphone so everyone can hear you. Secondly, we know that some of you all are going to the matinee. Happiest Song plays last. Feel free to exit at 1:45. We won't hold it against you if you leave. We know we may be engaging to us, maybe not to you. No, please make sure you get something to eat and hit the matinee on time. Also, we have 2 other lectures scheduled this weekend concerning Sweat and the Living Ideas series on what's tomorrow? Somebody tell me. Thank you. Saturday, we have Michelle Elam, who is a professor from Stanford, who is going to talk about sweat in the context of work and friendship across the color line, dealing with women and industry. And then on the 30th, that Sunday, Harry Elam, another professor that is kind of associated with Michelle, will be doing a retrospective of Lynn Nottage's work, which should be very interesting. So, what is the Living Ideas series? The Living Ideas series is a humanities program conceived by Bill Rausch to connect the work on stages in a very engaging, community-oriented dialogue. So we will be having engagement conversations like this one, documentary and dialogue series for around the program, as well as an interactive debate that will occur. All of that information is on a one sheet in the back of the room. And for those of you all who are on the web at OSF Ashland, /Living Ideas. And that one sheet looks like this. It's on the back table. Please, as you exit, grab one and you'll see the events. Now, to Julie Felise Dubiner.
Hi.
The Associate Director of the American Revolution series. Please give her a hand. That was a lot. I've had the pleasure of over the past year and 9 months, and what I found out is probably about 2 years in Chicago in the 90s that I didn't know about, of getting to know Julie Felise Dubiner as we were both up and coming theater professionals via the Steppenwolf Theater for You as a box office person at that time. But now you are not a box office person. Tell us.
I'm a box office person in my heart all the time. Love those people. Those people work really hard. Now, however, in 14 years since then, I am the Associate Director of American Revolutions here. And before that, I was the resident dramaturg at Actors Theater of Louisville in Louisville, Kentucky. And before that, I was the resident dramaturg at the Prince Music Theater in Philadelphia. And
so you are a dramaturg.
I'm a dramaturg by training and by nature. And and here I work, I sort of dramaturg the program as a whole. And then I also dramaturg shows in particular as needed. So I was the dramaturg for Sweat this year, for example.
So can you give us a quick definition, or not so quick definition, of what the American Revolution series is?
I thought you were going to ask what a dramaturg is. American.
You could actually start there too.
I could, but I'm going to start with American Revolution.
What a dramaturg is. Okay. Well, let's not like float by that. Can you tell us a little bit about dramaturgy? That makes sense.
Sure. It's like the silliest profession to try to define, and I don't recommend going into it. When I was teaching dramaturgy, I would always break it down into what I called the 3 C's. It was content, context, and concept. So I'm the person who finds the script or prepares the script or does whatever is needed for the script. I also create content for newsletter articles or program notes or web copy. Context is the historical research. Really easy to talk about, like when you talk about a dead guy play. What did people eat in 14th century France? I am the girl who can find that out for you. And then also, especially with and I look at my Shakespeare colleagues in the back, especially with the Shakespeares, you're talking about the context of the time Shakespeare wrote it, the story he's telling, and the time that you're doing it now. So there's always at least 3 time zones you're working in to contextualize. And then the concept, also really easy to talk about with Shakespeare. We're going to do Richard III set on the moon in the year 3000. That's the concept. So I work with directors and writers to sort of make sure that all those things get shook out. Is that good? Yeah?
Yeah.
All right.
So everyone uses that research, right, across?
Yeah, I mean, it depends. The field has changed so much since I started. Part of the reason I fell into dramaturgy was because I was a history major who acted. And so I would do the research for, the first one I did was a college production of Marat Sade, for those of you who know that play. I was also in the show, which is kind of hilarious to think of now. But I was the one who went and did all the research, both on how Peter Weiss made the play, on the very famous production from the 1960s, as well as we were doing it in college. It was the bicentennial of the French Revolution. So I was doing a lot of research on the 1789 revolution, as well as the revolutions that followed, the Les Mis revolutions, as I like to refer to them. And so if you need to know what a tumbril is, I'm your girl. And so that was back in the late 80s, early 90s, before the internet really took over. And so I knew how to use libraries, which made me very valuable. And so when I started my career, it was a lot of research. It was a lot of putting together actor packets. It was a lot of coming in to talk to casts or audiences about things. And now there's just as much of that, but it's very different now because of when you walk into a room now, between the way actors are changed and the access to information, most of the time when you walk into a room, the actors have already done a lot of their own research, which I actually have come to really love. For a long time, I just thought, oh my God, I'm only 25 and I picked a career that's obsolete. But now I've come to really love it, of actually having the conversation. I'm particularly good at distilling research. That is my special skill on my resume. I can put, World War I in context with the Iraq War and tell you a lot about Canada if you want to do a play called Mary's Wedding, things like that. But I'm not actually teaching history in the way I used to teach history.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let me give you a little bit of another set of ground rule. I'm going to come off this stage.
He's going to be Oprah.
And I'm going to be Oprah.
I was hoping we would be Donnie and Marie, for those of you of a certain age. Because every time I hold one of these microphones, I just feel like I'm a little bit country.
And I'm not a little bit rock and roll. But we did kind of like press the light.
Yeah.
Okay, so now.
And we're hauling.
Tell me, let's talk about American revolutions.
Yes, let's. Yes.
Because for me,
yes,
American revolutions is a very innovative opportunity for our particular organization to make a huge imprint into the field. Mm-hmm. And so tell me how American revolutions got to be here, and then how that segue into Sweat.
Sure. As I was not here actually when the program was born.
I'm sorry, hold on. This is horrible. If you have questions during this time, just raise your hand and I'll come to you. That's what I was supposed to say. Okay. Sorry, Julie.
Okay. Back in when Bill Rausch was coming for his interviews, as I understand it, and Louis, just raise your hand if I get anything wrong. He was asked to propose a big project, kind of. This is my terminology, sort of a legacy project. And so what he proposed was doing this big commissioning program of new plays about American history. And the original proposal had been to commission American playwrights to write plays about presidents along the line of how Shakespeare had written about kings. And then over the course of many conversations, and he brought in his friend Allison, who he had founded Cornerstone with, and over many conversations with many theater luminaries, historians, a lot of people, they spoke to hundreds of people as they were putting this program together, it morphed into what it is now, which is plays, it's moments of change in American history. And we're commissioning 37 plays, which luckily before I came for my job interview, I had an intern in Louisville who grew up in Ashland. And I said to him, why do you think that they're doing 37 plays? And Zach looked at me like I was the biggest moron on the planet. And he said, because that's how many Shakespeare plays there are. And I was like, okay, I'm stupid. They hired me anyway. When I was still in Louisville back in 2007-ish, 2008-ish, Allison had sent out an email to a number of the larger regional theaters proposing this program and asking for feedback. And I remember reading it and just being like, wow, I wonder if there'll ever be anything for me there. You know, I'm kind of a history person who does new plays. Like, that would be kind of awesome. When it was listed that Allison was going to be hiring an associate, I think I had like 26 of my friends forwarded me the listing just in case I hadn't seen it. So I'm incredibly lucky that I got this job. Where we are now is we have 24 of the commissions have been given to playwrights. With Row next year, 8 of our plays will have been produced in 9 years, which if you follow the new play landscape is incredibly successful and incredibly exciting. And all the plays that have been produced so far, with the exception of one, have gone on to multiple productions, which is also, if you follow the new play landscape, very, very exciting. Lynn Nottage was in the first group of playwrights that Allison commissioned. I think she threw out 10 commissions the first year. And so Lynn was in that first group, and Sweat is a co-commission with Arena Theater, which means that we have both supported the creation and production of the play.
So what is that process? How does that work? How does the commissioning process work? And how is Lynn identified as one of those playwrights that, you know, were noted and could fit into the series?
Alchemy.
So, little magic.
I'm not going to lie to you or the 12 people who are watching the live stream.
No, we know that there are far more than 12.
Don't scare me. This is the thing that I can talk to all of you, and I can see your faces, and I can tell when a joke is landing or when what I'm saying is making sense. It's that camera in the back of the room that's going to freak me the fuck out. Oh, sorry.
This is not on television. You don't have to worry about it. We got kind of free reign.
The selection process for the playwrights that we choose for American Revolutions is actually incredibly subjective. I read plays all year. I read somewhere between 200 and 300 plays a year. My first year here, I read 400 plays, which was like ridiculous. And not the smartest thing I've ever done. And so what we're looking for in general, we commission based on body of work and not an idea. So if you have an idea for a history play, do not pitch it to me. I don't want to hear about it. But what I am doing is I'm trying to make myself aware of who are our current writers right now, and who do I think might have some, it's a best guess situation of who might actually have something really interesting to say about a moment of change in American history. What's genius about moment of change is that it implies action, right? Something is happening, something has changed, which is something that I think a lot of people have trouble with in history plays, is keeping the action going and having it be more than a docudrama or just just a series of facts that somebody acts out for you instead of reading in a book. And so that idea, which again happened before I got here, I think is one of the most brilliant things about the design of the program. Lynn, we're actually just lucky that Lynn said yes to us. Lynn Nottage is a playwright who's been well known probably for 15, 20 years already. I remember when I was in grad school, she was a couple of years older than me. She was a couple of years out of school when I was in school, and we already knew who she was. And certainly by the time this program was launched, plays like Crumbs from the Table of Joy and Intimate Apparel, I think Ruined had been written but not produced yet at the time that she got our commission. And so she was just in that first group of people that they were like, I don't know, let's ask everybody who's really awesome and see if they say yes. And so we were really lucky that Lynn said yes.
Most definitely, most definitely. One of the things that I want to know is, so you identify the writer, they hopefully say yes. What's the next step? What do they do? Where are there parameters, or how does the work?
For the most part, we have given no parameters to it's really just moment of change. We get the writers together. One of the another really cool thing about the program is we get the writers together once a year. Anyone who's available to come, we have this event called the American Conversation, and we try to get as many of the writers from the program into a room together as possible. And the goal is that they will self-curate the program. So not only like, oh, well, I was going to write a play about Ben Franklin, but she's already writing a play about Ben Franklin, so I guess I'll write about Thomas Jefferson instead. I don't know. I'm just making things up. But of just sort of making sure that we're not doubling down so much. And then also, one of the things that we also heard was that writers get lonely. It's a very lonely profession to be an American playwright. And so actually looking at a group of American Revolutions writers as a cohort, as a group of people who are in a one bit, they're each contributing a piece to a much larger thing. So the first part of giving someone the commission is really sort of explaining that. And then, different people follow different paths. We have one writer who was commissioned in that first group who has had a topic for a very long time, but has not been able to find the time to write his play. And then we had in that very first group, Allison commissioned Culture Clash, and like 10 minutes later, they had American Night, it seemed. So it's like there's different people work in different ways. This play, Sweat, for example, is interesting because Lynn was commissioned and then Ruined exploded, and I'm sure she got very, very busy. And then she was commissioned in 2008, and then in 2010-ish, 2011, 2012, like over the course of that time, she had been traveling a lot and sort of thinking about a lot of things and cogitating. But it wasn't really until 2012 that the idea that then became Sweat started to fall into place. And then she gave us a draft of the play 2 years ago, and then we've had a workshop since then and given her notes since then, and so that's been sort of her trajectory time-wise. Is that what you meant?
No, that's totally it. Speaking of moment of change, Sweat is about deindustrialization in the time frame of what is now kind of broadly termed as the Great Recession. What led Lynn, I think a lot of folk, how many people have seen Sweat first off? Let me give, okay, so.
Is that everybody, or do I still have to be coy? Okay.
Who
has not seen Sweat?
That's important.
Okay, good.
So we make sure that we're not, giving spoilers away, but giving context and a good frame for your theater going experience. What was very intriguing about that moment of change when the bottom dropped financially for the country that engaged Lynn?
Yeah, there were, as I understand it, there were kind of two events that happened sort of back to back for Lynn. One was that she had just returned from, she had taken a big trip to Africa where a number of companies were performing Ruined around different countries. And she had just returned. And around that time, it was 2012. And the information from the 2010 census was being broken down and shared. And one of the things that she read was that Reading, Pennsylvania was the poorest city in the country, according to the 2010 census. And this was really shocking. I think it was shocking to a lot of us. I remember reading that article too, and my partner's family lives in Reading, so it was like, really? I've been there. And for Lynn, it was just really interesting because, this is the Reading Railroad from Monopoly, and this is a place that you associate with prosperity and what has happened in Reading, that this has happened. Around the same time, she received an email from a friend of hers, and the friend had written this email to a number of her close friends, and she was not asking for help, but she just wanted her friends to know that she had no money and that she had no safety net, nothing. She had no idea how she was going to survive month to month. And she had been keeping it a secret, she'd been keeping it to herself, and she just wanted her friends to know. And so those two, and then Lynn read that, and it was right around the time that Occupy Wall Street was starting up in New York. And Lynn lives in Brooklyn, and I think her friend did too. And so she grabbed her friend, and she's like, why don't we just go down to Zuccotti Park and just see what's happening? And they wound up going down to Zuccotti Park and marching with all the protesters there. And those two things sort of combined. And then Lynn did a similar thing with what became Sweat as what became Ruined. With Ruined, she actually went to Africa and she interviewed women who had survived the wars, the civil wars, and that research then became Ruined. With this, she went, down 95 over to I-80, and she went down to Reading to really meet people and talk to people and see the town and tour the town, just to try to figure out what had happened. So the play comes, it's not based on, it's not a documentary. The story is invented, but it is all inspired by the people and the stories that she heard.
A lot of primary research, though. A lot of primary research. I think what was really interesting to me in terms of that primary research is how, anecdotally, she was able to fold in a lot of the experiences and stories that she learned while there. Is that, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I saw you.
No, I was going to say, for those of you who have seen the play, I'm going to try not to give away too much. The young man, Jason, the guy with the prison tattoos, he was inspired. He's not based on, but he was inspired by someone that Lynn met in Reading. The actual situation, the actual product that the factory that they all work at creates is based on a real factory and what those jobs on the lines were. The bar, actually, for those of you, if you have access to the New York Times website, Lynn posted a photo essay of Reading right before we opened, and I'm sure it's still up if you search for it. But there's a picture of the bar that she and the director, Kate Wiersky, works very closely with her. So Kate and Lynn went to this bar, and that bar is our bar. It's like, did John Lee Beatty do any research? But it's so things like that of just sort of, you can sort of see sort of how everything spins together in the brilliant mind of Lynn Nottage.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. This is the part where I kind of turn, you even beat me to it. Great. One of the things that I thought was, again, amazing about this play is that
are you going to have a giveaway like Oprah too? Like, is there a prize under everybody's seat?
Our development
my favorite things. Is that my favorite things? Yeah.
But I always wonder, when stressors happen to human beings, how do they react, especially when there are close relationships between people? I think that what Lynn really does a great job in this work is showing what happens when economic stress comes and puts pressure on relationship. And I'm going to hit your question, but I want us to kind of think about what happens, what do you think is challenging between folk in relationship when those kind of stressors happen? Just kind of let that marinate, if you will. Ma'am, can you speak directly into the microphone or I'll get in trouble?
Yes, I can.
Yay!
So I think, to touch on your question, I think that the pressures of economics weighs very heavily on all relationships. what I think is so extraordinary about Sweat is the class question and the working class question, which I think a lot of the American Revolution plays have really brought out, which I deeply appreciate. My question is, could you list off the plays that have already been produced that are part of the American Revolution's series? As a reminder, I've seen a lot of plays here with my partner. And then could you also give us a glimpse of what is coming, and what some of those moments of change are? Because there's a lot of moments, even though this is a pretty young country, there's a lot of moments. So I'm wondering if you could talk briefly about what some of those future moments are. Do the playwrights get to choose what moment they want to delve into? That would be great.
Yes, I can. Let's see if actually I say that. Let's see if I actually can without my iPad and my phone and everything. So the first play out of the gate was American Night by Richard Montoya and his friends from Culture Clash, and that play is hilarious. If you have not had a chance to see it, it's still being done all over the country. There's been 8 or 9 productions. It's a young man who is studying for his citizenship test. He's going to take a citizenship test in the morning, Juan Jose, and he falls asleep and he has this fever dream that basically takes him through all of American history, and it's by Culture Clash, and they are this like wackadoodle comedy theater company. They're like beyond definition, so it's their version of American history, which is awesome. So like I said, that one's gone on to 8 or 9 productions, and a really cool thing, it's the first one that we did with the education department has a traveling school visit program where they take 2-person teams out into the school district all over California, Oregon, Washington State, Idaho, like crazy places. And Richard Montoya came back and created a 2-person version of American Night to tour with the school visit program, which was hilarious, and it involved a teddy bear. Let's see. After that was Ghostlight, which was by Jonathan. It was from Jonathan Mosconi's life, written by Tony Taccone, directed by Jonathan Mosconi. Jonathan Mosconi's father was George Mosconi, who was the mayor of San Francisco, who was assassinated with Harvey Milk. And so Ghostlight is about John growing up and dealing with coming out as a gay man when his father is who he is, standing next to Harvey Milk. And that one went on to a second production at Berkeley Rep. And then All the Way, you may have heard of All the Way. All the Way is by Robert Schenken. We commissioned All the Way, and Seattle Rep commissioned Great Society, and those 2 plays tell the story of Lyndon Johnson's presidency, which is like so many moments of change. Like it's like I don't even know how to like tell you which one Robert cares about most. All the Way takes you through the passage of the Civil Rights Act, and then the second act is where everything just goes to crap with Vietnam. So that one, and All the Way was so exciting. I won't lie. It was like ridiculously exciting. Like all of a sudden, like I'm working on a play and it's on Broadway. Like that's like nutty if you're in my life. Although I grew up in New York, and so my mom actually had like all the stuff on the refrigerator, like all the reviews and all the stuff. She has the Sweat one up now. I'm 46, but All the Way. So that one went all the way, and it won the Tony. And then it's also been produced a couple of times. There's a production actually coming up at Arena Stage next year, and someplace else. I can't keep track of oh, that's right. Yeah, they're making a movie. Actually, if you follow Robert Schenken on Facebook, he had a picture of the 2 dogs that they were casting as the Beagles. It was really great. And it's been such a tremendous ride. And Robert's play also won, it's called the Kennedy Prize. The family of Edward Kennedy set up, he loved theater. And so they set up this award for a play about American history. And Robert Schenken won the very first inaugural Kennedy Prize award. And Robert is a great example of what I was talking about with the cohort, where even though we're done with Robert's plays, Robert continues. He comes here every year to see shows. He goes to the American Conversation, and certainly has a long history with OSF as well. But he's continued to be an American Revolutions writer, even though his project is technically completed. And then that same season, we did All the Way Here in 2012. We also did Party People by Universes, right? Yeah. And Party People is about the Black Panthers and the Young Lords. And I think most of us have heard of the Black Panthers. I had never heard of the Young Lords, even though I grew up 50 miles from where Universes grew up, but that tells you a lot about everything. But the Young Lords were the sort of the Puerto Rican version of the Black Panthers. And Mildred and Stephen and Ninja from Universes, this was a really exciting project for American Revolutions because we helped them go all around the country to interview survivors of these movements, as well as anybody who wanted to talk to them about this time in American history, which was just so volatile, the late 60s, early 70s, into the decline of the movement in the 80s.
And Universes as the artists in residence.
Universes fell in love with Ashland and now live here. And now they are the resident ensemble at OSF. Party People went on from here. It was produced at Berkeley Rep last year. And I can't really tell you anything, but there's a major American city on the East Coast, which will likely be seeing a production of Party People next year. That same year, not here, but back in Chicago, where I used to sell tickets at Steppenwolf. Thank you. I tied it all together.
I love that. Keep going. Keep it going.
I'm a comedian. Bring it all back. At Steppenwolf, they produced a play that we co-commissioned with Steppenwolf called The March, which was adapted by Frank Galati from the novel by E.L. Doctorow about Sherman's March to the Sea. And they did an absolutely gorgeous production of that show. Just the design of that show was just, I will never forget it. I'm very grateful I got to see it. And then we took a year off, and then we did Liquid Plain by Naomi Wallace, which was about the North's involvement in slavery and the importation of people to serve as slaves. And that one was done in the Thomas. It was a very, very powerful show. And that one just had a production at the Signature Theater in New York just this past year. There was also a college production at UC Irvine last year. And then this year is Sweat. And then next year is Roe, which is by Lisa Loomer, which is about Sarah Weddington and Norma McCorvey, who are the real women behind the Roe v. Wade case. Norma McCorvey was the woman who stood in to be Roe for the court case. And Sarah Weddington was the incredibly young, she was like 27 or 28 something when she argued the case in front of the Supreme Court that eventually legalized abortion in the country. So Lisa's play looks at these two women and the time and the fallout from that case and where we are now. And if you know anything about Norma McCorvey, her interesting life. And then next year, it's actually in rehearsal right now in Connecticut at New Haven and Yale Rep, is Paula Vogel and Rebecca Teichman, a co-commission with Yale Rep. Paula Vogel and Rebecca Teichman's project is called Indecent. And that one is about, it's a famous play in Yiddish theater called God of Vengeance by a writer named Sholem Asch. And it was a beautiful play, and he wrote it, and he got in a lot of trouble with his friends for like not being a good Jew and writing stories about good Jews. And then when it played all through Europe, no problem. Comes to New York, plays Second Avenue, no problem. Moves uptown to Greenwich Village. I love saying something moved uptown to Greenwich Village for those of you who know New York City. I'm like, that's hilarious. Before the Jews moved to the Upper West Side. They played in Greenwich Village, and then they moved to Broadway in an English language version of this play, at which point they were shut down for obscenity. All the actors and the stage manager, they were arrested and charged with obscenity because the play deals with prostitution, lesbian love affairs. The father beating the daughter didn't seem to be a big problem for anybody, but that's, again, another story entirely. So Paula and Rebecca has been fascinated by this case in American history for a long time, since she was a graduate student, and then she brought in Paula Vogel to help her turn it into a play. And then so Paula has written this play, and that one is in rehearsal right now. It opens at Yale, I think in October, and then it goes from Yale to La Jolla Rep down in La Jolla, California later. So that is that. I think I did it.
Yeah,
I think I got everybody. And as far as what's coming up, I think there's not a lot that I can say about the projects that are still in process. I can tell you that one thing we did, for the most part, like I said, we have let the writers do free reign over their own topics. But Allison and I both feel very strongly, and Allison puts it really beautifully, that by the end of this program, we would like to have an impressionistic quilt of American history. So based on what we knew about from the information we're getting at the conversations we've had individually with playwrights, as well as the plays that have been produced, we sort of looked at the board a couple of years ago and we're like, what stories, if they're not told, will we actually be bereft about? And how do we ask writers to write on a topic that they may not have passion around? Because that has been one of the successes, is they've been able to come to us with their passion projects, right? So the three projects I can tell you about are the three where we went off book and decided to actually say, if there's not a play about these things, we will surely die. So the first one, it was actually right after Newtown. And so I had sort of, and I'm sure as many people did, I sort of lost my mind. And so we commissioned a writer named Dan O'Brien, who his play Body of an American Bill, directed it in Portland a few years ago. He's also a poet. He's also a very old friend, so it's really fun to have him be part of this group. Dan is writing a play about the history of guns in America, and that was as strict as we wanted to be with him topic-wise. So I don't know what he's going to do about that. I don't know whether he's going to take me to like the Colt factory where like they actually developed, automatic fire. Like I don't know what that means. Or I do know that as a research trip, and I have no idea whether this will be in the play, but you will know this, that Dan actually did go to Vegas, where he went to a combination strip bar and shooting range, firing range, and I don't know what that means. We also commissioned Dominique Morisot, who is a lovely writer, who's you'll be so familiar with her, but like the end of next year, you'll be like, oh, Dominique Morisot. Dominique, Allison had read this essay by a really brilliant essayist in the Atlantic magazine, Ta-Nehisi Coates. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He had written an essay a few years ago, which I'm going to blank on the actual title of it, but it's basically, Why Don't Black People Study the Civil War? And Allison, at the time, we had been invited to, there was a consortium of theaters that were trying to figure out what to do to celebrate the end of the 150th anniversary of the end of the Civil War. And Allison really very painfully felt that there were no Black voices in those conversations. So we decided to just do our own thing. And we got permission from Mr. Coates. So Dominique is not going to be creating an adaptation of the essay, but she's using the essay as a launching point. She hasn't started writing it, so a lot could change, but I know right now she's interested in writing about the experience of Black women in particular during the Civil War. And that is a co-commission with Penumbra Theater in St. Paul, Minnesota, which is one of our last great African-American theaters. And then the final project, Allison in particular, I mean, I think we all care about the environment. I recycle, I reduce, I reuse. But Allison is a very, very committed environmentalist, and she wanted to figure out how we could commission someone to write about a moment of change in the the natural environment. And so we actually tossed out that question. We contacted a bunch of our literary manager friends and artistic director friends and said, do you know any playwrights who might be interested in writing about the history of change in the natural environment? And so we opened that one up to a proposal process. And we got about 30 some odd proposals from writers around the country. And we chose a project by a writer named Idris Goodwin. No relation to Rob. No relation.
Although we joke about it all the time.
He's awesome. His biggest success right to now is a play called How We Got On, which was at the Humana Festival. I think it's going to be at Jiva next year. He's a really, really exciting young writer. And he had come across, there are these journals that a bunch of naturalists had put together when in the early 1800s when they were planning the railroad. They had sent all these naturalists and botanists and everybody out into the road. Excuse me. There's 9 books chronicling what the natural environment was before the railroad went through. So Idris is going to be doing something with that. He tells me he wants a workshop next spring, and I say, awesome. So those are the 3 that I can really talk about.
Okay, we got a question in the back, actually. And I do want to get back to that question that I asked you all, so you're not off the hook at all.
Thank you. Am I doing this right?
You're totally correct.
Okay. So it sounds like the last 3 plays that you just talked about being commissioned were commissioned very recently.
Mm-hmm.
So what I'm wondering is how many of the 37 were commissioned, like when you talked about getting that group of writers together?
Yeah.
I'm confused.
How long are these slow books taking? Is that what
Well,
you're
no, just how much of it was all conceptualized, at least with the beginning seed ideas, all 37 back in that original group. And also, is everything that's commissioned, does it all come to fruition, and actually are there some that never get produced?
Alice, I'll deal with the last one first. Allison and I were always saying that we will feel like the program is a success if all the plays get produced someplace. On a very basic, practical level, it's unlikely that the Oregon Shakespeare Festival is going to produce 37 new plays about American history with any sense of alacrity, even if the playwrights start writing with any sense of alacrity. And for us, or at least for me, I can certainly speak to it, although I think my superiors agree that I don't want to hold anyone up from a production opportunity if they have one. So like the March went on at Steppenwolf, and Indecent is going on with Yale and La Jolla, and these are awesome, wonderful things. It is not someone taking anything from us. It is actually just great that these plays are in the world. I think I mentioned a couple of times that a lot of our plays are co-commissions, and part of that is to double the opportunity for a playwright to have a play considered by what they consider a home theater, a home base. And so that's the goal. And then I forgot the first thing you said.
Was everything sort of
no.
Was everything conceptualized from the
we're
beginning?
going year by year by year. So the first group, Allison threw out a big splashy, like 10 commissions or something like that. Since then, we've slowed down to 3 or 4 a year. This year, we'll probably give 5 just because we have a little catch up to play just with the way time got away from us this year in terms of keeping up with things. All 37 commissions will have been given out by 2017, but we don't know who they are yet. We are moving through time and try. Like I said, I read a couple hundred plays a year just to sort of stay current. So there are people that I can fall in love with and badger my bosses to give commissions to.
So we're almost at the quarter till mark for those of you all that are going to matinees, just FYI. Can we visit that question really quickly that I asked you? Does anyone have a response or anything that hit them? Ask it again. I hear you. We've done a lot of conversation. Sweat deals a lot with stressors on relationship. What were some of the moments that kind of hit you or engaged you? And what do you think the stressors are that can affect relationship in deindustrialization, or times where finances are hard in America? I'm asking this because Reading, Pennsylvania wasn't the only place that deindustrialization happened. What were those things that occurred in your lives or that you saw that were stressors that might have affected relationship is what I'm really asking. And you were next anyway.
I think one of the stresses in Sweat was when one of the women went for a promotion and the others were, why are you stepping out from being one of us? Yeah. The fact that the woman who stepped forward and wanted the promotion was Black entered into it later on, but when introduced, they were just 3 co-workers.
It's one of the things I think Lynn does so beautifully in this, and I don't think I'm giving anything away for the folks who haven't seen the play yet, but there's such real people that Lynn creates, and there's a sort of one scene and then this next scene where you meet all these women. It's this big crazy birthday party, and I think those of us who are lucky enough to have friends, which hopefully I still do after this, like we've all it doesn't really matter when things are good. these two white women and this black woman can get along just fine. You can look at how they treat the Latino busboy and wonder about that, but there's a different level of ease that they have with each other before somebody is losing something and somebody is getting something, and then when they're all losing everything. And I find it really beautifully the way Lynn has basically put a metaphor of race and class in this country into really very real characters. They're not mouthpiece characters. Even though they are metaphorical, which I think is actually really gorgeous.
Do you have your question?
I also had a question about Hamilton, since I understood it was commissioned by the Public Theater of New York and is now moved to Broadway, and since it seems to be an American history play, whether it was part of just this energy about doing things on American history. It
is a weird zeitgeist moment. And if you have a chance to see, I actually got really lucky. I was in New York a couple of times last year, and I knew the dramaturg at the Public, and I was like, this is when I'm going to be in New York. If there's any single ticket available while I'm in New York, it was still at the Public in the smaller space, and I was like, I will go. Just let me know when you have one single ticket. So I got to see it, and it lives up to the hype. It's really, really tremendous. There was actually a moment when in the original round of ideas of things, one of the things that Allison had wanted to do was to commission a hip hop history of America. It's like the hip hop history project. There's a folder in my office that actually says this. And then Hamilton happens, so it's like, how come that can be ours? But I do feel like there's, and I think actually the deindustrialization, the economic crisis that we've been in is a huge part of it, and Occupy Wall Street. This idea of, are we living up to our values in this country, and who gets to define what? You can talk about income disparity. You can be on any side of the political fence or fences that you would like to be on. But I do feel like we are at a moment of reckoning in this country. I think having a black president, I think having a black first family, I think, the changes that we have had in the kind of jobs that are available, and who, like the way the middle class has really suffered in particular during this time, or disappeared, depending on who you talk to. I believe it's disappeared. And the way you can't actually have a single income family anymore for most people is really interesting. And I think for me, I feel like the zeitgeist is, we are all taking a step back to say, are we, are we actually serving the pursuit of happiness for all people? Like, what are the things, the truths that we put out about what it is to be American, and our sense of awesomeness? Are we actually as awesome as we think we are? And I think something like Hamilton, also in a profoundly different way than our plays have, but also is just taking this other look at whose story gets told and why, and what does the history we learned in high school have to do with today, and is the history we learned in high school the whole story? And I think these are really big questions that were clearly part of something bigger, which is exciting. And yes, for God's sake, why couldn't Hamilton come from my program?
Let's go in the back really quickly.
The question of education, and that it was the African-American male that wanted the college education. Could you speak to that a little?
I don't have a lot to say about that. I mean, I think it's interesting because Lynn herself comes from her family. She grew up in Brooklyn. Her brother is a district attorney, and she's Lynn Nottage. And so for her, it was not a big deal that it would be the black family versus the white family of like who would go for education, who would be aspirational, who would be whatever. I don't think that was as much of an issue as it may seem to be. I think for Chris as himself, he has that great speech towards the middle, where he just sort of lays out, like, I'm not leaving the floor, I'm not leaving you. Like, I think it's more important, or just as important, I'm not entirely sure how to answer it, but it's the idea that you can actually still be with your friends, with your people, even though you actually would like something else, and when something else is considered something more or not your place or whatever. I think later in the play, what happens with Cynthia when she becomes a Black supervisor and how that comes around to bite her in the ass with her friends as well as her coworkers has more to say about racism than Chris wanting to go to college, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I was actually addressing
More the question of the cost of higher education and the kids taking on levels.
Oh, loans. You're talking about loans. I was going into race. Yeah, I think, well, he does. This is part of his thing. He's trying to stock up on extra shifts. He wants to do it by himself without whatever help he thinks. His mom might actually financially be able to help him at the top of the play. But he wants to do it by himself. So he's going to do it with loans and by taking extra shifts. Also in the play, he's already 21 when the play starts. So he's going to be an older freshman because he has been saving up for this. And so that reality for him of having to actually think about things beforehand. And this is, I mean, I carried a lot of student debt myself for a long time. It's all paid off now, yes.
Mine isn't.
Yeah, well, and just, I think it, and
I think it's a real point, not to interrupt.
Well, and
you,
it's
but I think-
changed.
and I'm a year older than you. Right?
I didn't know that.
I am. But I mean, and I have a graduate degree. Right. So I think, I mean,
Well, and I think this
point-
is where, like, I think before the massive, I think it's impossible to overstate the event that September 11th, 2001 was in the American psyche, even though it's not in the play, but just sort of like that turning point. The play looks at 2000 and 2008. So it's before the Gore Bush hanging Chads thing and the actual first terrorist attack on the U.S. mainland. And then in 2008 is, of course, the huge meltdown crisis where, like, Bush is saying, like, I don't know what's going on. Hey, Obama, good luck. You know, it's like, do we bail everybody out? And I feel like there was a really big change. Talk about a moment of change. And I think Chris, I don't know that Lynn thought about this necessarily specifically, or the actor who plays Chris has thought about it specifically, but just in terms of education, like, I went to graduate school in 1996, and it never occurred to me that I would not be able to pay back my loans. It was just, of course, and like, I was kind of an idiot, as we've discussed before, so like, that's me. But I think now I look at a lot of, especially going into the arts, I mean, Chris is talking about being a teacher, which makes a lot more sense. But I talk to a lot of young people in the arts right now who are really not interested at all in getting an MFA, because if you get an MFA, you're going to be carrying $100,000 in debt, and there's no guarantee of work, much less work that's going to pay you enough to pay back your loans. And some of that's been mitigated a little bit with the way they do percentage of salary and yada yada. But you are making a much different decision to carry debt now than I think I was 20 years ago when I was in school.
But Cynthia's point, and that speech that you're referencing, it talks about waiting for a long time. I really understand how you're feeling about this situation, and me coming to your aid and being in solidarity. But I've been waiting for a long time. Okay, and I would suggest that that's the kind of waiting that not only us as arts professionals who have maybe 6 figures of debt with MFAs have to consider, but the working person who, has been waiting for a long time. And I think that kind of transcends, now white collar, blue collar. We've this story is about that transcendence to a large degree.
And it's interesting too, like in the play, and this all comes out in the beginning for those of you who haven't seen it, so don't worry. But the young man's father, who's been locked out for 96 weeks, still thinks it's a better gig to take the money from the factory as opposed to train for another profession. Like, even at that moment, that lack of clarity, like, we can all have it in 2020 hindsight, but like, in that moment, it still seems better to, of course, like, you're going to make $50,000 a year working in the factory. A teacher's only going to get paid $30. Keep the job in the factory, like, of this, and he's been locked out for 96 weeks. It's like, what does that mean for really any of us being able to predict the future or see beyond a present tense?
Mm-hmm. Question.
Thank you. So you said the American Revolution series commissions end in 2017?
By 2017, the 37 commissions will be out.
So thematically, you guys commission new works all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a new theme that you're thinking about going after American Revolutions?
Nothing's been decided or announced. So she's on her phone. There is a large theme project coming up that I can't really talk about because it's not my program, but it's going to be very interesting and exciting. I don't know. I mean, we've been incredibly lucky with American Revolutions on the grant side. My program is completely grant supported, which means that it doesn't take resources from other parts of the organization on a grand scale. And so to launch a big project like that again would involve us finding another large grant like that, I think, just in terms of how busy OSF actually is and how expensive it is to operate this theater. We would actually need to have a large grant. There's been a lot of ideas floated. There's a couple that I'm totally in love with. And then I was at a donor lunch the other day and somebody was like, why don't you just commission another 37 plays about history? Why stop? And I was like, I don't know. Why stop? It's like, I don't know if I have a job after 2 years. Let's just keep going.
I'm coming to you, sir.
Development of the American Revolutions, it's clear that simply attending theater here is not going to keep us up to date on all the things that are. This is the first I ever heard of March, for example. So how can we stay up to date on what's on developments?
I will try to be better after I finish this sentence. We do have a page on the website. And so all these plays and all of our commission writers are on the website. It's a really fine dance that we do of how to talk about work that hasn't happened yet. And when we feel that it's fair to publicly talk about a project or start sharing any information, things I feel very protective of the playwrights in particular. I can tell you that we're hoping to do a workshop, but I can't actually invite you to the workshop. But I am trying to find ways to which is not to say that I'm at all good at updating the website, which is totally my responsibility, and I totally suck at it. But of figuring out how to not just, I just want to share my excitement about things without getting in the way of anybody's process. I could tell you that I had a conversation with a playwright who spat 3 ideas at me, but until I know which one she's going to choose and I know she's committed to it, I don't want to talk about it because I don't want anyone to be disappointed when she decides to write about something else. Or to be able to give people the freedom as possible to go. And then also here, between union rules and different people's levels of comfort and things like that, there's only so much that we can share with the public as well. So, but it is a really fine line and a really fine dance, and there's dancing involved. A lot of dancing, of trying to walk that line. I'm sorry you'd never heard of the March because it was really lovely. And Steppenwolf on their website, actually I was just there for another project looking at some stuff. They still have their page up for the March, which has some video and a lot of photographs of their production.
So someone evoked the concept of working class that is essential to this remarkable and profound, I think, exploration of working class relationships in America today. But when I look around this room and when I look around the theater, I don't see any working class people. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious as to what OSF...
Except for me and Rob.
Well, sorry, dude, no. So I'm curious about what OSF and American Revolutions might be doing, what efforts they might be making to bring actual working class people or bring this work to them and bring them into the conversation, because it seems to me it's a little rarefied if they're not.
Well, I do want to speak to that really quickly. I think that there are definitely initiatives, and I think by a show of hands, there were people here that consider themselves working class as well. So I think we should, not exactly think that our population is homogeneous in that respect. Thank you. We're genius, but yeah, thank you. But there are efforts, and just like Lynn, who is doing community work in Reading via this very project, we're doing the same kind of work trying to get community engagement happening in the Rogue Valley and beyond via programs, but also there's a huge effort via our audience development department to engage people and to have them know about the worth of coming to Ashland, but also we're starting to go there. So I think that you'll see if you check out some of the Living Ideas information and collateral and some of the information on our website, you'll see some of those overtures to the public, overtures to communities that may not necessarily even value what's here.
But is anything being done specifically with sweat, is what I'm asking?
Most definitely, yeah. Yes, you can. You want to talk?
Give me that microphone and a drink. We are. It's as Rob was saying, there are many outreach programs going on, very many audience development programs going on, and in a lot of ways, some of it is about spreading the word about programs that already exist here, especially to try to get our local population. I mean, how many of you are from Ashland? Oh wow, that's more than I thought. Well, don't disprove my point. But
how many of you aren't?
Yeah.
Can you raise your hands?
Since most of our audience is coming from hundreds of miles away, this is their vacation, and for us to be reaching out more into the local community of people. My son goes to the elementary school, one of the elementary schools here, and I was at a birthday party. It was really insane, but that's a whole other story. But none of the other parents had been to the theater. And I was like, you live here. I was like, I don't have to convince you to travel and find a hotel and do all this thing. And so, I wound up telling them about this great $20 ticket program that OSF has for Ashland residents or for local residents. And I didn't have any idea how it worked, but I knew that it exists because I used to be a box office manager, and I was like, call the box office, they'll know everything. And so now all of my son's parents' friends come to see shows. And with Sweat in particular, we started this, Lynn won, or OSF won with Lynn, a grant through the Doris Duke Charitable Fund. My stutter comes back whenever I try to talk about large names that involve lots of D's. But with this grant, we're actually, part of it is that we're going to be commissioning another play from Lynn, which is wonderful. And then also part of it was to create programming around Sweat to bring people in. So what was designed, which is still in process right now, as Rob said, of actually taking the play to people in some way. We can't take the whole play because unions, drama, rep systems, yada, yada. But we are going to bring a series of scenes to the play, and we are going to be making tickets available to people if they can come here. And one of the things that we did, I keep joking that I wrote my B+ research paper on this, of looking at the connections between what happened in the East and the Rust Belt with the decline of factory life to this area of the country with the decline of the timber industry, and looking for parallels and points of connection in that. So one of the things that Allison and I have been doing with our audience development friends and our education friends and some other friends of looking at different communities that might actually find resonance with Sweat, not necessarily the same story, but of what happens when everything that was true for generations is no longer true. So we're looking at that. I met this really fabulous young man from a place called Butte Falls, which is about an hour or so from here, about an hour and a half. And it's an area that used to be a big timber place. And it was an Oregon History Day. I was a judge for the Oregon History Day, and it was all the high schools in the Rogue Valley in the county. And this kid, his history project had been, I found this so profound. It was about the mill that used to be in his town, and his paper was about the job he would have had if the mill was still there. And I found that to be so amazing because I didn't grow up, I mean, my parents were teachers. You know, I've lived all over the country. The idea of staying in a place where there is no job was fascinating to me. And also this idea of like what has been yanked or the feeling has been yanked for people of like, well, if I was 50 years older, I would have been this, but now what am I? So that's one of the communities, hopefully, that we'll be bringing scenes from the play to, and also looking at doing writing workshops there as well. And we're definitely doing one at the Medford Library in a couple of weeks of doing writing workshops of, you know, how to tell your own story. So it's difficult, you know, and it's, I think it's one of the great challenges that OSF has of really diversifying the audience, both racially, ethnically, and then add in class is a really, really big deal.
If you go on our website, osfashland.org, /living ideas, you can see those events that are taking place. I'm in real trouble. We are over time, and I'm getting the scowl looks. So thank you very much. Folks on campus, folks on the webosphere, appreciate your attention.